I became particularly interested in these near-death experiences where people would, say, die on the operating table, and then from the perspective of the ceiling, they would see what happened during their resuscitation. And then when they came back to consciousness, tell everybody what they did. And the people in the room would say, but you couldn't know that. You were dead when that happened. We knew your heart had stopped. That's a real great kind of evidence of an afterlife. But then there's other things, children with past life memories that are confirmed.
Yeah.
And then you have things like deathbed visions and shared death experiences. It just goes on and on. All these different things are like puzzle pieces. And we're starting to get an idea of what the picture looks like when you put the pieces together. It's so fascinating to research it.
Welcome, Simon. So we're so happy you're here, and I'm just looking forward to this conversation. I have so many questions, and so happy you're here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm glad to talk to you.
Good. So the way we usually start, and Kristen is not with us today. She had some challenges with, she doesn't have power. So those who are missing her, it's just me and Simon today. But I wanted to start with just asking you, how did you come into this world? And did it come through experience first and then curiosity, or curiosity and then experience? Just to get us started on this journey that you've been on.
I started very young. When I would go to the local public library and I would get out books on anything supernatural. I was 10 years old, so it could be ghosts, Bigfoot, UFOs, anything. And then as I got older, I kind of got interested in two different paths. One was just UFOs and the other one was the afterlife. And I didn't live in a religious household, so we didn't have any religion around at all. And it was a thing where I was looking for evidence of it, more of a, I don't know if you'd say a scientific point of view rather than faith or belief. And I started investigating it more as I got older. And then in the 1980s, I went to the College of Psychic Studies in London. And I wasn't a student there, but there were lots of students there who were learning psychic stuff, mediumship, channeling, how to take people through past life regressions. And you pay a little bit of money and they can practice on you. So I used to go there maybe every 2 weeks. And it was like an investigation rather than trying to contact somebody who died. And that's when I was taken through my first past life regression in 1987, which was really powerful. And I went straight into the hypnosis and straight into this past life. And there was so much there that came from it. And that really kind of spurred me on. And at the same time as all this, I'm still reading all these books. And then as time passed, I had more experiences myself. I had some kind of weird psychic flash where I was going to my friend's wedding in New Zealand, and I was in London 2 weeks before I was going to New Zealand. I've never been there before. And I had this flash of about 30 seconds of time. I had this vision of myself in New Zealand. And then when I got there, that vision I had happened exactly as I'd seen it in the vision. And you have deja vu, and that's just like a quick flash of something. But this was 30 seconds of time. And I remembered the road names and what the buildings looked like in suburban Christchurch, and the conversation I was having with my friend in their red car, and the route we were taking. And so that was like a little step forward. And so the past life regression was like maybe a first step, and then there was that step, and then all these different things have happened, including seeing UFOs and all sorts of things happening, especially when I go to mediums and I'm taken through more past life regressions. And I became particularly interested in near-death experiences when I read Raymond Moody's book, which I think was in 1976 that was published. And so I started reading a lot of books about that. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts. This must have started 10 years ago when I started listening to them. And I started thinking, I could do that. Maybe I could do that. Because I've been a musician most of my life, and I use recording software for music, and the idea of just recording a voice, that's a piece of cake compared to recording a whole band. So I started getting into the podcasting, and so I've done 800 episodes now, and a lot of them are 1 hour interviews with people who've had amazing experiences or research experiences. And so
Mhm.
it's been like a huge education for me of over talking to so many people. And it's like I'm so lucky because who gets to read a book and then quiz the author about the book?
Yeah.
And that's something I've done. So I became particularly interested in these near death experiences where people would say die on the operating table, and then from the
Mhm.
perspective of the ceiling, they would see what happened during their resuscitation. And then when they came back to consciousness, tell everybody what they did. And the people in the room would say, but you couldn't know that. You were dead when that happened. You
Yeah.
were hooked up to these machines. We knew your heart had stopped. We knew your brain had flatlined. And so that's a real great kind of evidence of an afterlife, which is what I might say is I've been looking for my whole life. But then there's other things, children with past life memories that are confirmed.
Yeah.
And then you have things like deathbed visions and shared death experiences and terminal lucidity. And then, it just goes on and on. All these different
Yes.
things are like puzzle pieces. And we're
Yeah.
starting to get an idea of what the picture looks like when you put the pieces together. But I don't think we've got all of the pieces and we don't understand it all. But it's so
Mhm.
fascinating to research it.
It reminds me, it's kind of like the itch that we can't scratch. Like we're constantly, there's always more. And it's true there. It's once you get started, there just is this desire to keep going. So when do you think was there one particular near-death experience that you were, that somebody shared with you that really got you started in the near death, investigating the near death side?
I think it's probably Pamela Reynolds' case because hers was such a strong case where she had an aneurysm at the base of the back of her brain, and the neurosurgeon had this new technique, is Dr. Spetzler, which he called standstill, which is where they kill you basically. It's so delicate to do this operation that they use some kind of hypothermic technique where they stop your heart and your brain flatlines, but they've taken your body temperature down very, very low, and you're on this bypass machine, which is circulating liquid through your blood that's cold. So you're kept cold throughout the whole operation. And when she, stopped living, she was in the operating room watching everything they were doing. And because they deliberately killed her. They had her hooked up to all these things, so they knew she had no brain function, no heart function. They put these specially molded earbuds in her ears. This was in, I think it was the early 1990s. So it's not like the earbuds you get today with your phone. They're
Mhm.
molded and specially for her ears, and they played clicks into her ears, nearly 96 decibels, which is very loud. So there was a critic who said, well, she could probably recount the conversation because she heard it, but the sound of 96 decibels in these clicks going so fast is like standing next to somebody using a circular saw. How
Mm.
loud that could be. So she went on, she came back and described all these things, the conversation they were having, the music they were playing in the background, which she thought was odd, and how they had to change something they were doing because they couldn't find something. And then she also had that spiritual experience where she went elsewhere and met with her deceased relatives, and
Mhm.
all that kind of thing happened. And so I was looking at it and thinking, it's almost like if you were researching near death experiences, what would be the perfect experiment? How
Yeah.
would you do it? And this is pretty much how you do it. So looking at that and the doctor confirming everything she said, and they just couldn't explain how she knew this stuff. That really got my attention, and I thought this is something I want to get more into. So I think every time I interview a near death researcher or somebody who's had a near death experience, I always ask them, did you have something like that where you could confirm something?
Yeah. Which is amazing because I think that there's so many people, in order for them to believe that someone could have this experience, they need that proof. That, there's so much of us that are stay in the 3D world, and if we don't have the proof, well, then we're not going to believe it. And so it's kind of an amazing to have these facts, as you are, as you have researched and found some of these near-death experiences. Do you see a connection between the near-death experiences and the past life regressions in terms of where their consciousness goes, or their conscious, I don't know if that's a question that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, because there's a certain type of past life regression which was between lives, which
Mhm.
is takes you into the afterlife. And when I take somebody through a past life regression, I always go into that space just for 15 minutes or so. So we hope to encounter your spirit guide there. And in the near death experiences, when people move into that spiritual space, they almost always meet with a spirit guide or some kind of spiritual being that seems like a guide. So that you see that in both those places, both sides of it. And some of the guides can be quite funny, and some of them can be quite serious. But yeah, I see that on both sides.
Um, well, do you think is it the same space? Like, do you believe that that's the same space, that you're reaching the same, level of consciousness, or dimension, or whatever we could call it?
I wouldn't think so. I've been taken through hypnosis a lot and past life regressions a lot, and that space between lives. And I would imagine what the near death experiencer, what happens to them, their experience of it is so different to mine. Mine is
Okay.
nothing like what they experience. And the place that they go to, the near death experiences describe so many different locations, all sorts of places that could be just an idealized earth that's amazing to somewhere that's neutral, and even sometimes hellish landscapes.
Yeah.
And with the hypnotizing somebody with the past life regression, what you see between lives usually is a space of light. And there you can go in further and see buildings and things, but it seems very heavenly and light filled to me. You don't see green fields and
Right.
your deceased relatives and all those sorts of things.
Hmm. Is there another past life regression, not past life regression, but near death experience that you could share that might interest our listeners?
Yeah, there was a guy called Randy Sheaffer, and he was put into a coma when he had COVID. He had they induced the coma, and his body got in such a state the doctor said he had a 3% chance of survival. And while he was in the coma, he had 4 different periods of a near-death experience. And he said afterwards he couldn't put them in order. He doesn't know in which order they happened. And he found himself in this incredible hall that was just so tall and so long and wide, and this incredible windows, and the whole design of it was just beautiful. And this man appeared next to him and was talking to him and saying, "This is my favorite room. We call it the welcoming room." And they talked about it. And then the guy says, "You're not supposed to be here. You have to leave." And so he was okay. And he went out through these incredible big wooden doors out into this city that he said was nothing like you've seen on earth. It was so beautiful, so amazing. And he's walking the streets, and he was aware that there were these people around them, but he couldn't see them. It was almost like his frequency wasn't high enough or something
Mhm.
to, and he got lost, and he started getting worried about this. And he was looking around, and he saw this stairway going up into the sky. And he thought, maybe I'll go up there and I can learn something. And he started going up the stairway, and he heard a voice shout out behind him, "There he is. There's Randy. Grab him." And he felt this tug on his collar at the back and pulled backwards. And then he went back into his near death, into his coma. So it was no consciousness. And then again, he came into consciousness, and there was a period where he said he was walking down this dirt path in this wonderful forest, and there was a little boy there, just wearing shorts, who was smiling at him, saying, "Come with me, come with me." And he took him into this amazing house with all these kind of red velvet chairs looking out this window, and there's a river and all these people there, and they're all talking and swimming. And the little boy said to him, "I'll be back with you in just a moment." And he went out, and then he came back a little while later and said, uh, "Sorry, your room's not ready. You can't stay. You have to go back," which is weird. But towards the end of one of the near-death experience episodes, this man appeared who was quite young, and he had a moustache, and he started saying, "Tell Madison at the salon that I'm okay. Tell Madison at the salon I'm okay." He kept going over and over this. And then he said, "I'm a veteran." And Randy kept on hearing the word veteran, and he saw the man on a white porch with lots of red, white, and blue ribbons and American flags. And then he came out of that and went back into his coma. So eventually he's released from hospital. The doctors say he makes a miraculous recovery. And a few months later, he's at home and he needs a haircut. And he's rifling around and he finds this business card, which he gives to his daughter and says, "Could you book me an appointment at this hairdresser's?" And she looks at the card and she's like, "This is Madison, Madison at the salon." She starts crying, and she's saying, "Yes, that sounds like my grandfather that died about a year ago." And Randy's saying, "Well, did he live near here? Because I'm worried I saw his face near here and my brain's just making it up somehow." And she said, "No, he lived in Idaho. He never came to here, and they were in Florida." So he talked to her about the porch and the red, white, and blue flags. And she was saying, yeah, he was a veteran. And every year he would make the flags up and the ribbons. And then we'd have a veterans thing at the house. And we'd all get together and do all this stuff. And she gave him the phone number of her grandmother called Kathy. And he rang her up. And she sent him a photograph of John. And that's exactly the guy that he saw during his near-death experience.
Yeah.
And they became friends, and eventually he ended up visiting the house, and he stood on that white porch that he'd seen in the near-death experience. But something else happened, and Kathy said this isn't the first time that John's tried to make contact, because she found some insurance stuff in the house after he died, and she thought maybe he had life insurance. So she called the number, and she got through to this guy, and he's saying, no, I'm nothing to do with insurance. And she's saying, "Well, sorry, I was trying to find out about my husband." And he says, "So where are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm Kathy. I'm in Idaho." And he goes, "Wait a minute, you're Kathy in Idaho?" He said, "A couple of weeks ago, I had a crash on my motorcycle, and I was really badly hurt, and I was almost looking down on my body, and I heard this voice shouting, 'Tell Kathy in Idaho I'm okay,' and repeating it over and over." And so that's such a weird connection, that you might think, how did this guy John know that his wife would misdial a call 2 weeks later and talk to that complete random guy in California? And it's almost like he could see into the future, or he was at her side and misdialed for her, affected the electronics or something, so it went to the right place. So I really like that story, because it's got that two sides of confirmation, this such specificity, and this
Yeah.
chain of events to get that phone call made was so weird and synchronistic.
What I love is the synchronicity, because for people who have not had big experiences, many of them have had synchronicities. And my husband passed away in 2017, and my daughter was married and got married in 2019. I was driving down to meet her for the wedding, and she was sitting getting highlights put in her hair, and she calls me on the phone, and she says, "Mom, Dad just called me." So she had her cell phone in her lap, and a call came in, and it said David Thompson with his number. And she didn't pick it up, but it was the exact number, or his phone number and his name. And it was, there's something happened that he was able to come through to let her know that he was with her that week. So stories like that are so important, because they help people begin to open that window to believe that maybe we do go on and that there is consciousness on the other side. Have you had trouble getting people to, especially like in the beginning, to believe you as you were trying to share all this and to tell the world what you were discovering as you were researching and working with, doing the past life regressions, but also investigating the near-death experiences?
A little bit, I suppose. There's different extremes. My brother, if I start talking about it, he goes, "No, shut up, shut up, shut up! You're creeping me out. I don't want to hear it." But then there's other people who you start talking about it, and they're like, "Look, I've never told anyone this before, but I had this experience." And then there's people who are fairly interested, and I knew a guy who would just roll his eyes if I'd talk about it. But there was never really anybody who was, I don't know what you might call aggressive or anything like that. I find people are interested a lot of the time, but you've got to choose the moment to talk about it, I think.
Yeah, it's very true. And often family, I have had some experiences, and family does not want to, they don't want to engage about it. So so that's what is amazing about, the work that you have done. And I love, your book that is just about to be released, which is Verified Near-Death Experiences. It shows the world that, there's so much evidence that is out there. And just allowing us to bring this up and have more conversations about it. I have read some of the experiences that are in that book, and one of them, who I've heard this before, I heard him speak, was Vinnie Toleman's story, which is a incredible story. Would you like to share that one?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It's a good example of how near-death experiences can be so personal and different, but
Right.
have the same basic core elements. When he was with his gym buddy, and they'd got this supplement to help with gym stuff, like with your muscles and things, and they'd been using an American supplement that was 5%. It was diluted, and they got one from Thailand, and they didn't know that was 100%. So they took about 20 times the dose they should have, which was so toxic for them. And they thought, well, whenever they've had a problem like this before, where their stomach feels so bad, they just have a burger or something, they feel fine. So they went to the local burger restaurant, and his buddy sat down at a table and collapsed. And Vinny went into the bathroom, was just a single person bathroom, and locked the door. Then he collapsed. And it was while he was collapsed on the floor that he died. And so he started floating up above his body, but then he went up above the whole restaurant, and he could see through the roof, and he could see in all the different rooms, and he almost could hear what everybody was saying. And he had this feeling that he was watching a movie, and he thought it was weird that the director would have this perspective. And why has the director put everybody's voices in? It's such a noise of voices. And so that was an interesting way that, so I've heard that before as well, where people will leave their bodies and they might be in the hospital, and they can see through the walls, and they know what's going on around them. But Vincent Toleman, he was the paramedics came, and it was about 45 minutes after he died, and he said even like rigor mortis had started to set in. He was a bit stiff, and he was taken into the ambulance by the paramedics, who declared him dead, and he was in a body bag. And he was sitting in spirit form, sitting next to his body opposite this new EMT, and it was like his first week. And this EMT had this message. He said Vinny felt this energy come over his shoulder and go straight to that EMT and hit him, and this EMT's heart was glowing. And there's this voice that said, "This one's not dead." And the EMT was looking around like, this is a bit weird. And then nothing happened. And then it came again much stronger. This one's not dead. And so the young EMT unzipped the body bag and got the defibrillator out, and he started charging it up. And the two experienced EMTs in the front of the ambulance, they shouted over their shoulders, "Don't stop it, stop it. We're not allowed to do this. You're going to lose your job." And he zapped the body, and then nothing happened, no heartbeat. And so the guy in the front started to climb over his seat, and the young guy zapped the body again and got a bit of a heartbeat. And the guy who was climbing over his seats just stopped to go, hang on a second, there might be something going on here. So they did eventually get his heart started again. And when he went into the hospital, he he started seizing, and they got him into the ICU and everything, and they were looking after him. But in his experience after that, he was in this spiritual space. And there was
Mhm.
this guy who was his guide, and he said he had long flowing white beard and long flowing white hair over this white robe. And he asked him, "Are you Jesus?" And the guy laughed and said no. And he says, "Are you God?" And he laughed even more. He said, "No, I'm your guide. I can show you anything you want." And he took him to all sorts of spaces in the afterlife, and there were different stages where he would kind of raise his vibration, his frequency. And
Mhm.
I think he said it was through knowledge, when he learned certain
Mhm.
things, that would raise him. But this guide said, "Oh, you can call me Drake." And he's like, "Okay, we'll call you Drake." But after the near-death experience, um, he was wondering about all this, or what will happen. He had a miraculous recovery as well. And a few months later, he was at his old hometown with his grandmother, and there was a presentation in the local hall where they were talking about people in the town's past who were significant. And on the screen came up that face, Drake's face on that screen, and he was kind of blown away. And that they said his name, uh, something like, I can't remember exactly. It was like George Rivers, or something like that. And he thought, that's funny. The guy said to call him Drake. So later on, he talked to his grandmother and said, "Who was this guy George Rivers that we saw?" And she said, "Oh, you mean Grandpa Drake?" And that was Vinnie's great 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 grandfather.
Yeah.
So that was a real, a kick for him, that he realized that there's something really did happen, and he might have had doubts about it, but that was the kind of a verification in there for him. There's the kind of verification that's in the book. So yeah, I really like that story.
Yeah. Well, and I know that he continues to have a relationship with Drake, and that Drake has been guiding him, since that time. And that kind of resonates with me, because I have this experience of having a guide with me, which my ancestors came to me when I was having a very troubling time, to tell me that they were hearing my prayers. And after that experience, a guide came in, and so hearing Vinnie talk, as people who do have experiences, who want to doubt everything. When I heard him speak and talk about his guide that is with him all the time, it comforted me. It made me realize that, oh, all right, maybe I'm not making all of this up. And because you continue to feel that way. Have you had experiences of that yourself, where you've doubted what you've experienced?
I don't know if I'd say I've doubted, because these experiences can be quite a kick for me. I haven't
Yeah.
had little ones, and it's like I kind of feel we're on a spiritual path, and sometimes something in the universe wants to move you forward another step on that path. And I wonder if where I am today was all the whole point of my whole life was to guide me to this point of being a communicator with a podcast and a book.
Yeah.
But it's I can tell you a story that happened to me with these feathers, because I interviewed a woman who'd written a book about angels, and she was talking about, when angels are around, because white feathers are there. And I didn't really think much of it, and because like I said, I'm not religious, so angels to me was a religious thing. But the next day I'm walking down the street, and this white feather just floats out of the sky right in front of me. And I thought, oh, that's odd. That reminds me of the thing last night, but I didn't pay much attention. And then about a month later, I was interviewing a medium. And after we finished recording, I was telling her about this feather, and she was saying, "Oh yeah, that's a sign." And I didn't think much of it. But then I stopped recording and finished the call, and I went to see my teenage daughter in her bedroom, and she's very neat and tidy, and the floor's not covered in stuff, not like her sister. But I went in the room, and there was a feather in the middle of her floor on this completely clean carpet. And I said to her, "Where did that feather come from?" And she looks down from her laptop and is sort of like, "I don't know," and then goes back to what she's doing. So that was really weird. But then there's more happens. It's like a few weeks later, I went to visit a medium, and I was at her house, and I was sitting in an armchair, and she was sitting opposite me in an armchair, completely clean floor between us. And she did the mediumship, which lasted about an hour, and she came up with some great stuff. And then I told her about the thing with the feathers, and she just says, "Look down." And there in between us with a feather on the carpet. And it's like, but that wasn't there the whole hour we were talking, and neither of us got up to do anything. And you look down at it, or I did, and it just does not compute. It's like my
Mhm,
brain stopped. I just can't explain where that feather came from. And so
mhm.
that's like that kick that moves you down the path. And I
Right.
wonder about the spirit guides or the angels. They were sending me these signs, and then they did one in my daughter's room, and I didn't get it. And it almost like they're slapping their foreheads, like, "What do we have to do to get through
Yes.
to this guy?" And so they got through to me on the third time round.
Yeah. That is, it's very happens a lot. You need 3 times. You need 3 times
Yeah,
in order to believe it, because our brains don't want to. We're so steeped in the 3D, and just that this is, third rock from the sun and there's nothing else. That it's these experiences. You want everybody to have them. To have these experiences, and it's fascinating, that, I mean, this. I think Raymond Moody, I think it's 50 years ago, IANDS is going to be International Association of Near Death Studies will be having their 50th anniversary this year, or it is their 50th anniversary. And to think about where they started, and that you were actually a student of them as you began your career, and you began to open up and understand. It's amazing how it does continue to grow. I'm curious about what with all the research you've done, and all, everything that you've been involved in, how has it changed your understanding of consciousness? Like, if you going back to, I mean, I don't even know if you can answer that, because I think if asking that question myself, and it just kind of happened, but could you talk to that a little bit?
yeah. I suppose what I've learned over time, and through talking to a lot of people and my own experiences, is that I feel consciousness is perhaps some kind of energy field, and that it exists around us, and that you could say that our brain is like a radio that picks up this consciousness. And when your body dies, well, let's say when the radio's broken, that doesn't mean that the radio station stops transmitting. And it's almost like I see it like that. And maybe people might say, well, yeah, but people get brain injuries, and they know exactly the part of the brain where the memories are and this other stuff. But then, with the radio, sort of part of it gets broken. Maybe you can't get to another channel, or you can't turn the volume up or down or something. But then there's other people who have terrible brain injuries, and their brain seems to remap, and they're back to normal. And I think it's just the amazing way that the physical interacts with this energy field, this consciousness. And we see it in all sorts of places, even within UFOs. My UFO podcast, I like to interview people who say they've been abducted by aliens, and that gets into all sorts of consciousness things happening. And you see a crossover between the afterlife and the UFOs, which
Mhm.
is also fascinating. And I talked to Whitley Strieber a couple of weeks ago. He was telling me about a guy that was staying at his house where he's had these ET encounters, and it was a family, and they was the mother and father and the little boy, and their other boy was off at summer camp, and the other boy at the cabin was upstairs in the bedroom, and he came downstairs and said, a little blue man's just been in my bedroom, and he told me to tell you Timothy's going to be okay. And a few minutes later, the phone rang, and it was the summer camp saying Timothy's had an accident. But the thing was, Whitley Strieber was saying that he's had encounters with ETs that he would describe as little blue men. He said they're cobalt blue. So it's weird that this little boy would say a little blue man came into my bedroom, and also that he had a message from their son. And how did he get that message? What was happening? What was the connection? So yeah, and it gets really complicated, doesn't it? So I wouldn't say I really know what consciousness is, but
Mhm.
it's all around us, I think, and we're just they say a spirit having a human experience.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that, consciousness is is something that is so difficult to truly understand, and that there's so many of us are trying to make sense of it. And you know the research and the experiences and what you've done with hypnotherapy and past life regression and all of that is just so helpful to just bring this continue to bring the topic and to talk about consciousness and to understand that there is more to who we are than we believe. It is a challenging world out there right now. And if you look at the news or you look at anything that's going on, it can be very challenging to just get stuck in the negativity or in the fear, and to allow us to think that, okay, maybe there's something more than this that is guiding us. Do you feel guidance? That's a really good question. Do you feel like you are guided? I feel like you are guided. Do you feel like you are guided?
I would say it's more of a logical viewpoint to the way I look at it about guidance. When I've met my spirit guides, they one guide I encountered during hypnosis was very funny and helpful. Um, but I wouldn't say day to day I notice anything. I'm not psychic. I'm not a medium. I don't really pick up on those things. But I have weird things happen with numbers sometimes,
Mhm.
and it's just a thing of numbers repeating. And I'll see it on the phone, like it might say 1414, and then I'll pause something on Netflix. It'll be 3535, and I'll get a bill, and it'll be 5252. And I'll get this 3 or 4 times a day. It's not just
Mm.
every now and then.
Yeah.
And it will go like that for 2 weeks or 2 months, and then it will stop. And it's noticeable that it doesn't show up anymore. And when it starts again, I really notice it. Like there's some kind of a sign there. And you could say they're trying to send you a message, but I have no idea what the message is. I wish they'd be clearer with it. Maybe send me a text or something.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's interesting because I think you are somebody who is, I think people can believe in, because you aren't the medium. You aren't the one that, you are somebody that's trying to look at these experiences and to explain them in a way that people who maybe are just learning about this or curious about this, that they can really see it in a little bit more of a black and white way. Because I think what happens is sometimes we ask people to believe too much, and that's when they say, no, I can't believe any of this. But when you can do, which is what the book is showing, when you have the proof of these afterlife experiences where somebody has left their body and it's their consciousness has separated from their physical body or at least gotten stretched, if that's one or the other, that and I think that's so important, because I think it's helpful for the people who are on the fence and really need that kind of understanding in order to begin to believe a little bit more. Is there like another story? Speaking of that, because as we talk, it goes so fast, and I want to. Is there another story in the book that you'd love to share that stands out to you to share with us?
Yeah, there's Tibor Putnoki, a guy in Hungary in the early 90s, and he had to go into hospital for very high blood pressure. And the doctor did tell him that it's not looking good, and they didn't know how long he might live. And he suddenly had this terrible pain in his stomach, his chest, and then the next thing, he's standing in this hospital ward, and he sees all these people rushing over to this person, and the doctor's there, and they're giving him so much attention. And I think Tybal's looking over, thinking, "Oh, who's that patient? They must be a VIP. They're getting so much attention there." And on the side of the ward, there's a kind of preparatory room, if I can say that word properly, where the nurses have a space they can put things together and do things. And it's got a two-way mirror there. So you can't see in from the ward, but you can see in the ward from the other side. And he wondered what was in there. And he said he felt this funny vibration on his body. And then instantly he was in that room. And there was a nurse with a trolley, and she was taking things out of a cupboard and quickly putting them on the trolley really fast. And she dropped something that rolled underneath the cabinet. And he thought, I wonder what that is. And then he found himself with the viewpoint of this thing under the cabinet. It's like 4 inches away. And he could read it, all the information on there. And there was a nurse in the room who was on the phone to her husband, and she was telling him about where their doctor's number is in the little phone book they have in their house, this, with the pediatrician's number, and he can't find it. And so Tybal's listening to this nurse and thinks of the husband, and then there's this vibration again, and instantly he's with the husband in this apartment, and it's about 7 kilometers from the hospital. And he has a good look around the apartment at the furniture and the carpet and the books on the shelves. And he's watching this guy flicking through this phone book saying, I can't find the pediatrician's number. And Tybor spots it and he's shouting, no, there it is. But, the guy can't hear him. And Tybor notices this man's socks, and they've got lots of little pictures of animals on the socks. And Tybor thinks, what sort of a man wears socks like this? But later on, uh, I think he was dead for 9 minutes with the resuscitation. And afterwards, when he was awake, the doctor came to him and said, so what happened during those 9 minutes? So Tybor told him, and the doctor went to the cabinet in the nurse's room and looked underneath, and he found the package just as Tybor had described it. But not only that, Tybor knew the serial number, and that was correct. And that's very specific. And then he talked about the apartment that was 7 kilometers away and the phone conversation. And he described the apartment and all the furniture and the books, and even talked about this guy's socks. And the doctor talked to the nurse saying, do you know Tybor? And she says, no, never met him before. But they went to the apartment, and the doctor looked around, and it was just as Tybor had described it. The phone conversation was correct. The nurse confirmed that. And when the doctor returned to the hospital, he was holding those socks with the animal pictures on. And so much of his experience, all these different bits were confirmed. And there's more to it. In the book, it's a longer story, and other things happened, like his life review that he had, and the questions that his spirit guide asks him, which are very kind of insightful. So yeah, I really like that story. But I've got 30 stories in this book, and it's almost like they all stand out because they're all so amazing.
Yeah, they do. They do. I have read some of it, and they are amazing because the stories are just they're just incredible. And it just gives us this understanding of how powerful this connection is that we have, that we have on the other side. What do you think about for your, your continued research, or where do you see this, this going, and just for, I guess, humanity? Do you see this becoming more mainstream, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that's going to happen. There are academics and professors really looking into this and coming to the conclusion that this shows consciousness is not a product of the brain. And there's all sorts of little experiments going on. And Pamela Reynolds, that we talked about earlier, had that hypothermic standstill for her operation. When she had it, it was brand new, but now they're using it now and then. And there's a doctor, uh, Michael Sabom, I think his name is. He's wants to do a study in American hospitals where whoever's having that procedure, he can put little things in the room to test whether or not they have an out-of-body experience, and that because of the procedure, they'll know this person's definitely dead, and they couldn't know these things unless their consciousness was out of their body. But also, there's other things coming up which I find really interesting. I interviewed a guy who wrote a book about coma and near-death experiences, and he came across a small number of people who said they had a life on another Earth while they were in the coma. And there was a guy that was maybe in a coma for 7 days, and he came back. He said, "I lived this other life for 22 years." And the doctor would say, "Oh, it's just a hallucination." He goes, "No, it's just as real as this life. I had a job, I had an apartment, I'd go home in the evening, I'd have my dinner, I'd go to a movie, I'd have the commute. When I woke up here, I thought this was the dream because the other place was so real." And he said that he fought for a year. He did a tour of duty in a South Asian war in a country that doesn't exist on this earth. And he said there were all these little differences there, like the McDonald's sign was a different color to this earth. But then there's a woman who talked about having this other life while she was in a coma, and she had a child in that other life. And the child was like 3 or 4 years old, and then she wakes up here. And as far as she's concerned, she's lost a child, this terrible thing. And people are just saying, "Oh, it's a hallucination, don't worry about it." But she was saying, "No, that was absolutely real. I had that child, I had a husband, that was a life." But she did say maybe a year later she had a child, and when soon as she saw it and looked in its eyes, it was like, that's them. That's the child from the other life. So I'm interested in this kind of weird idea of a multiverse, because there's a theory in
Mhm.
reincarnation that we're not just in this earth, that there's lots of, say, I'm Simon, and there's many Simons on many earths and different universes, and your soul's getting all these experiences of all these Simons, and that's eventually, when we all die, it all goes back to the soul. And there was something with deathbed visions. There's a guy in America called Dr. Christopher Kerr who did a clinical study in a hospice. He was the guy in charge at the hospice, and he had to go through all these ethical standards things to make sure he was allowed to do it properly. And there was somebody there that talked about being transported to Earth in 1926. And Kerr did ask them, was that a dream? And the guy goes, "No, I was actually there." How did they do that? So that's something I'm getting interested in, and I'm thinking of writing a book about that idea of coma patients having these other lives on other universes.
Yeah, it is. I think there's so much to be explored, and that one of the things that my guide actually has taught me is to be more open to mystical things, to be more open to um, things are so. Uh, I'm going to use the word fantastical, like not that it's a real, compared to what we think they are. And we get visions of that when you talk to people who've had near-death experiences, and people, who have had these things happen to them. And I think that's one of the things that is we have to try and be open to, and it would be a wonderful continuation of the work that you've been doing, which is just amazing. So it always happens so quickly. It's the time to kind of close up. But is there anything else that you'd love to share, either more about the book or just something, wisdom you'd love to share with us before we end?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is that near-death experiences have been reported for thousands of years, and
Mhm.
it's not a new phenomenon. There's one of the stories in my books from a guy from 1906, And I interviewed Dr. Gregory Shushan the other day, who's written a book about near-death experiences in ancient cultures. But one thing that I find when I take people through past life regression and we get to that point where we encounter their spirit guide, one of the questions I ask the guide is, can you give us advice on how we can have a stronger connection with you going forwards? And they almost always say meditation.
Mhm,
And so that's interesting. And they all say, we're always with you and we're
mhm,
always on your side. And if you need help, you should just ask for it, because
mhm.
that they won't help unless you ask.
Yes, absolutely. And I get that same information from my guide that and it is amazing the connection that we can have. And that's what they've asked me to do, is to continue um to share this, and bringing guests on like you are the way to do that. So before I would love to let our listeners know where they can connect with you, and to share more about your book, that they can so that we can get your book, that they can buy your book, which is amazing.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, the book's out on March 24th and it'll be on Kindle and it will be on paperback, and there's an audio book version, and I've got wide distribution. So it's not just Amazon, it'll be Barnes and Noble and all sorts of places. But you'd probably have to order it when you went in. They wouldn't have it on the shelf. And my podcasts are, oh, wrong side, Our Paranormal Afterlife and Alien UFO podcast. And they're just anywhere you find podcasts. And there's 800 episodes there. And my website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And if you're thinking of doing a past life regression, you can go on there and go to my calendar and book a 20-minute consultation call, which is free of charge. So I don't charge anything. And we can talk 20 minutes about what you'd want to accomplish if you did a past life regression. Some people want to do therapy, others just want to explore and see what comes up. So that's where you can find me.
Wow. Simon, so deeply grateful that you joined us. Your knowledge, your experience, the research that you've done has just brought so much to the world, and really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
It's been great. Thanks a lot for inviting me on.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.